My husband, the district attorney, had come home from a business trip with gifts for everyone in the house. A silk scarf for his mother, a watch for his sister, even a box of artisanal pastries for the housekeeper. Everyone but me. That's it. Ethan Hale fixed me with a cold stare. You want a divorce over something this trivial? I helped him out of his suit jacket, folded the wool fabric still warm from his body, and said quietly, "It's more than that. For years of marriage, 3 of them he'd volunteered for an out-of-town posting, saying my education wasn't good enough to stand at his side. We'd married in a rush after an unplanned pregnancy, when I lost the baby. He said I hadn't been careful enough. I'd given up my dream of drawing comics to be a full-time wife, and he said I had no ambition and only knew how to spend his money." I curled my fingers tighter around the cuff of his suit sleeve. The wool fabric beneath my fingertips was fine and smooth, scented with his usual cool cedar cologne, and a faint hint of travel dust. 3 years of his out-of-town assignment were over. He was finally home. My heart beat dully in my chest as I summoned every ounce of courage I had. "It's more than that." Ethan lowered his gaze to my hand clutching his cuff, his expression completely impassive. He'd just showered, and was dressed in dark gray silk loungewear, his posture elegant and upright. An invisible wall of distance pushed me 1,000 miles away from him. We stood in that vast study, barely a step apart, yet separated by a mountain of unspoken things. At last he spoke, his voice cool and detached. "Clara, this engagement was arranged by our families long ago, 4 years ago. You came to me of your own accord and said you were willing to marry me." My body stiffened involuntarily at his words. He was right. I'd been the one to reach out when the Bennett family was at its lowest point. I'd clung to him like a drowning person grabbing for a lifeline. I ran my thumb absently over the fabric, feeling the familiar faint callus on my fingertip. It was the mark of years spent holding a drawing pen. It was also the scar from when I'd pricked my finger hand-sewing this very suit as a surprise for him, over and over until it healed. He never knew. In 4 years, he'd never known any of it. Perhaps my pale, drawn face gave him a moment's pause. Ethan sighed, so softly it was almost imperceptible. "I was in a hurry on this trip. Forgetting your gift was my oversight." There was a faint, conciliatory note in his voice. "Tomorrow I'll have Liam Carter order you the latest designer bag. Pick whatever brand you like. Just tell him." My heart sank sharply. So that was what he thought. That my strange behavior tonight was all because I hadn't gotten a souvenir from his trip. A bitter ache tightened in my throat. I wanted to explain, to tell him I hadn't been waiting for a gift, that I'd never cared about things like that. But I opened my mouth, and not a single sound came out. For years of silent marriage had worn away my ability to speak up for myself. Ethan's brows furrowed faintly, a flicker of impatience crossing his face, the casual irritation of someone in power. Enough to shatter me completely. "It's late. Get some rest." I stood frozen in place until the study door clicked softly shut behind him. That quiet sound was like a lock, sealing all my emotions outside. Back in the master bedroom, the huge king-size bed felt split down the middle by an invisible line. I lay on the very edge, my body tight with tension. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of our quiet breathing. The mattress beside me dipped suddenly. Ethan rolled over, moving closer, his familiar pine scent wrapped around me at once, sharp and almost aggressive as it filled my lungs. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I went rigid all over. His mother's pointed remark from earlier rang in my ears. "Clara, it's about time you two had a child." A sharp, stabbing pain flared deep in my lower abdomen. Cold sweat broke out across my back instantly. I curled in on myself instinctively, my nails digging deep into my palms. An arm stretched out, hovering above me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the same routine we'd followed for 4 years. But the wait I expected never came. There was a soft click, and the last of the bedside light went out. He pulled his arm back, rolled away, and put the same distance between us again. That suffocating pine scent slowly faded. My taut muscles finally relaxed, and the sharp pain ebbed away. In the dark, I let out a long, shaky breath of relief, but right on its heels came an even deeper, heavier wave of disappointment. I laughed silently at myself in the dark. "Clara Bennett, what on earth were you expecting?" Ethan Hale was golden boy born with every advantage. At 26, he'd passed the state bar exam ranked second in the entire state. His future limitless. All the society heiresses in New York City would have lined up for miles to marry him, and yet he'd married me, an ordinary girl who was good for nothing but drawing. I still remembered that rainy day 4 years ago. I'd clutched that thin slip of paper that read 6 weeks pregnant, and stood like a gambler at the grand iron gates of Hale Manor. Ethan had listened to what I had to say, and said nothing for 3 whole days. After 3 days, that proud man had finally bowed his head to the trouble I'd dropped in his lap. He didn't love me. I'd known that from the very first day of our marriage. For 4 years, I'd walked on eggshells, trying to play the part of the perfect wife, trying to make up for forcing this life on him, but it had all been for nothing. I owed him. I'd always owed him. At 7 o'clock the next morning, the sky was just lightning. Ethan came back from his morning run, a light sheen of sweat on his skin and the crisp chill of early spring clinging to his clothes. I took a clean towel from the cabinet by the front door and held it out to him. "It's cold out. Go take a hot shower." My voice was flat and even. He took the towel, pausing mid-motion as he wiped his forehead. His deep eyes traveled slowly over me, from head to toe. I was wearing a faded old hoodie from my college art department, the school crest on the chest cracked and peeling with age. His gaze turned cold, his mouth pressing into a hard line. "I won't be home for dinner tonight. I have a work event." He dropped the towel and turned toward the bathroom. Not another word. I was used to it. I bent to pick up the towel still warm from his skin, ready to take it to the laundry. Maeve Sullivan, the housekeeper, came out of the kitchen carrying breakfast. When she saw the dark circles under my eyes, she lowered her voice with a look of sympathy. "Mrs. Hale, were you up drawing again late? Now that Mr. Hale is home, you should sleep in a little." I glanced back at her and put a finger to my lips. "Maeve." She nodded at once and said no more. On the short walk to the study, a thought crossed my mind. I stopped short. I finally understood what that cold look from Ethan had meant. He thought I'd dressed like this on purpose, a silent protest over the gift I hadn't gotten yesterday, that I was making a point, showing him I was upset. A wave of bitter sadness rose up from somewhere deep in my chest. So that was who I was to him, a petty, calculating woman who held grudges over trivial things. And the saddest part was, I knew him well enough to know exactly what he was thinking. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing the ache down, and pushed open the study door. It was the only place in the entire Hale household where I could find a moment's peace. I sat down and opened the household account book, grocery lists, utility bills, social gifts. Pages and pages of numbers and entries, detailing every expense of this household over 4 years. I held my pen, my fingertip resting on the cool paper, and my chaotic thoughts slowly settled as I wrote line by line. Only here, dealing with these small, concrete tasks, was I just me. I'd just finished checking the last entry and was about to close the book when the internal phone rang. It was Arthur Graham, the butler, his voice as steady as ever. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Liam Carter is here." Liam, Ethan's chief assistant. My fingers tightened around the receiver. Arthur went on. "He says Mr. Hale sent him with something for you." I set the receiver down and sat still for a moment. Liam Carter. The name was like a stone dropping into the calm lake of my thoughts, sending ripples outward. I stood up and walked out of the study. The atmosphere in the living room felt tense. Liam stood by the entryway in a crisp dark suit, his expression as professional and restrained as always. In his hand he carried a large shopping bag, emblazoned with a logo I couldn't name but knew at a glance was expensive. Maeve and the other housekeepers stood off to the side, keeping their eyes down, but sneaking curious glances from the corners of their eyes. There was sympathy in those looks, and curiosity, and a sort of quiet understanding. I walked over calmly. "Thank you for coming all this way, Liam." He nodded slightly and held out the shopping bag, his voice completely neutral. "Mr. Hale's orders. He said it's compensation for you." "Ma'am, compensation." The word lodged in my chest, heavy and sour. I didn't reach for it. "Maeve, put that away for me." Maeve stepped forward quickly and took the heavy bag from him. I saw her shoulders twitch almost imperceptibly when her fingers brushed the fabric. Thank you. Have a good day. Liam. I dismissed him. He didn't seem inclined to stay anyway. He said a polite goodbye and turned to leave quickly. The front door closed, shutting out all outside eyes. Maeve stood holding the bag, her face tight with poorly hidden anger. Mrs. Hale, this is... I raised a hand, cutting her off before she could finish. Put it in the back of the closet. I don't want to see it. I spoke softly. The staff dispersed, leaving only Arthur Graham behind. He closed the study door, and the formal butler's demeanor softened into something warm, almost paternal. Mrs. Hale. He handed me a folder across the desk. What is this? I asked. A publishing house picked up your webcomic Childhood Days. They want to sign you for a print edition. My hand froze in midair. After a few seconds, I let out a soft, almost self-deprecating laugh. So someone had been willing to listen to all the thoughts no one else ever saw. Also, Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. I had a friend back home look into things. Your brother Leo's job transfer. There's a good chance he can be moved back to New York within 6 months. Leo, back to New York. Those 3 words hit me like a thunderclap, ringing in my ears. For years, I'd married into the Hale family for him, given up my dreams, locked myself in this gilded cage. I'd thought we'd spend the rest of our lives living miles apart. And now Arthur was telling me he could come home. A huge, overwhelming rush of joy and heartache crashed over me, so strong it made my whole body tingle. Arthur's words moved back to New York kept buzzing in my head, leaving me dazed. Memories I'd spent 4 years shoving down burst through the dam I'd built, flooding my mind. I could almost see my father. He hadn't had much education, but he was the most optimistic man I'd ever known. Always said people should be like sunflowers, always facing the light. He'd raised my brother and me alone with his woodworking skills, his rough hands able to carve the most delicate wooden combs. I remembered how he'd pulled a bloodied man out of a car wreck once. That man had been Ethan's father, Harold Hale. It had forged a tiny, tenuous bond between our 2 families, and it had become my only lifeline. The scene shifted. My father lying in a white hospital bed, never waking up again. A construction site collapse had taken him, and taken the only light our family had ever had. Our whole world had fallen apart. My brother had been working in a factory out of town. A machine had mangled his fingers, nearly crippling him. Our grandmother's health had gotten worse by the day. Medical bills piled up like a mountain on our shoulders. I'd clutched my thin college diploma and hit dead end after dead end in the city. All the drawings I'd once been so proud of had been worthless next to Survey. Val. Despair had pulled me down like a dark whirlpool, slowly swallowing me whole, until that day, when I'd found an old business card in my father's wallet, with the Hale family address printed on it. I'd called that number. I'd used the thin debt of gratitude they owed my father for saving a life, and the best years of my 20-year-old self, to buy my grandmother a chance to live. It was a debt, one the Hale family owed my father. Tears finally spilled over, dropping one by one onto the dark mahogany desk. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from making a sound, but my throat hummed with the quiet, trapped whimper of a wounded animal. Mrs. Hale. Arthur's voice was soft, full of gentle pity. Actually, all these years, Mr. Hale has had me keeping an eye on your brother's situation. I looked up sharply, my vision blurry with tears. He told you to do that. He did. Arthur handed me a tissue, his voice dropping lower. Your husband doesn't show it much, but he's always cared about your family. This transfer, he pulled strings at 3 different levels to make it happen. My heart felt like it was being squeezed tight in a fist, then slowly released. Bitterness, grief, and a faint, confusing sweetness all tangled together. So the thing I'd begged so hard for, he'd been quietly arranging all along. I took the tissue and wiped my face roughly, my voice hoarse. Thank you, Arthur, he sighed, looking at me with kind eyes. You're a good girl, Mrs. Hale. From now on, just build a good life with your husband. Start a family. Things will get easier for you. I looked down at the spilled coffee stain on the desk, and a faint, bitter smile tugged at my lips. Easier? Maybe, but my life was never supposed to have only one path. I'd just finished tidying the desk when Mabel Clark, Mrs. Hale's personal maid, came to fetch me. She said the lady of the house had made a wellness tonic broth. Victoria Hale's room smelled strongly of medicinal herbs. She studied me for a moment, then pushed a bowl of dark, thick soup across the table toward me. You've looked pale these past few days. I had the kitchen make this to build up your strength. Drink it while it's hot. I took it and nodded meekly. Thank you, Mother. She twisted the jade bracelet on her wrist elegantly. Her voice measured. Ethan's at an age where all his friends have kids old enough to run around. James Wallace's little boy learned to say dada on video call just the other day. My fingers tightened around the spoon until my knuckles went white. Of course, that was what this was about. Victoria sighed, gazing out the window as if talking to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. If that incident hadn't happened all those years ago, Ethan would have married Scarlett Moore. I'd probably be holding a grandchild by now. Scarlett Moore. That name was like a tiny needle, always pricking me when I least expected it. I kept my eyes down and drank the bitter, astringent soup in silence, my throat feeling stuffed full of cotton. In this house, I always felt like an intruder, an accident who'd taken someone else's rightful place. It wasn't until I got back to the master bedroom that I felt like I could breathe again. I pulled back the curtains and let the golden sunset flood in, falling across my drawing desk. Only here could I catch my breath, if only for a little while. I spread out a sheet of paper, but couldn't bring myself to pick up a pen. Marrying into the Hale family looked like the luckiest thing in the world to outsiders. A respectable family, polite in-laws. I should have been grateful, but no one else knew what it really felt like to live this life. I thought back to when we'd first married. There hadn't been a drawing desk in this bedroom back then. Ethan's study was huge, with perfect light and walls lined floor to ceiling with books. I'd asked him, timidly, if I could have a tiny corner in there for my easel and paints. He'd been looking over paperwork at the time. When he heard me, he'd lifted his head. That was the first time I'd ever seen that cold, icy look on his face, like a calm lake freezing solid in an instant. He'd looked right at me, and his voice had been ice cold. The study is for work. Keep your things out of there. Your things, my art, my pens, my whole life and 20-something years of dreams. To him, they were just things. I never mentioned the study again after that day. I'd moved all my supplies into this bedroom, carving out a tiny, pitiful little space for myself in the room we shared. The sunset light faded to gold. I picked up my brush, dipped it in ink, and was about to set it to the page. From downstairs, Maeve's voice cut through the quiet, clear as a bell. Mrs. Hale, Mr. Hale is home. The ink on my brush bloomed into an ugly, dark splotch on the paper. The door opened. Warm steam and the sharp, clean scent of lemon body wash washed over me. Ethan stood there in dark gray loungewear, his short hair still dripping. Droplets rolled down his sharp jawline and vanished into the collar of his shirt. He walked straight toward me. I tensed up instinctively, my fingers curling tighter around my brush. His shadow fell over me and my drawing both. A hand landed on my shoulder, through the thin fabric of my shirt. I could feel the heat of his palm. I went completely rigid. When did you learn to paint? His voice was lazy, fresh from the shower, right by my ear. His eyes were fixed on the half-finished painting in front of me. It was an early autumn mountain landscape. I'd used heavy strokes of raw sienna and cadmium yellow, trying to capture the way the sunset turned the forest to fire. Your color work is good. He sounded genuinely surprised, like he'd discovered something new. You've put a lot of work into this since we married. A sharp ache twisted in my chest. Put a lot of work into it. To him, my art was just a hobby to pass the time as a bored housewife, just like his mother's flower arranging and tea ceremonies. I didn't explain. After 4 years, I was used to it. I just gave a faint, thin smile and looked down, pretending to tidy my supplies, but the hand on my shoulder didn't move. Ethan's gaze drifted from the painting to the tiny, cramped little corner I'd claimed for myself. Easels, tubes of paint, stacks of archival watercolor paper piled neatly. It was small, crowded, and just as messy and trapped as all my unfulfilled dreams. He seemed to remember something. His brows furrowed almost imperceptibly. Why didn't you? He stopped mid-sentiment. I didn't have to look up to know exactly what was on his face. Probably regret. Maybe a little embarrassment. He'd been about to ask why I didn't paint in the study, and then he'd remembered. The study was a place I'd been forbidden to set foot in. I thought back to when this bedroom didn't even have this desk. I'd been so hopeful, so careful. When I'd asked if I could have a little spot by the study window, I didn't need much room, just enough for an easel. He'd been leaning against the bedhead reading a file back then. When he'd heard me, he'd lifted his eyes. That was the first time I'd seen that almost cruel coldness on his face. He'd looked right at me, and his voice had held no warmth at all. The study is for work. Keep your things out of there. The room fell silent. The hand on my shoulder burned like a brand. So hot it felt like it was searing straight through my skin. That unfinished sentence hung between us, thick with awkward tension. After a long moment, Ethan pulled his hand away. He turned, paced a couple steps in front of my tiny drawing desk, and stopped. "I'm sorry." His voice was low, like he'd forced the words out through gritted teeth. "I was unfair to you back then. I had prejudices." I held my brush, my fingertips ice cold. Prejudices. What a light, easy word. But I remembered clearly, on our wedding night, how he'd called my most beloved treasures your things. That humiliation of having myself and my dreams dismissed all at once had been a thorn in my heart for 4 years. Now that thorn had been worn down by time, grown into my very flesh. Hearing him apologize now didn't stir the storm I'd once imagined. I didn't even feel hurt anymore. I just thought it was a little funny. It was too late. I'll have Arthur clear out a space in the study. You can move all your supplies in there. He looked at me, his eyes holding a sincere, almost patronizing warmth. Better light, more room. I lifted my eyes and looked at him calmly. The cold indifference was gone from his face, replaced by something else. "I'm fine right here." My voice was as calm as if I were commenting on the weather. "I'm more comfortable here." Ethan's brows drew together, clearly surprised by my refusal. "Do you have enough paint and paper? If you need more, I'll have Liam order the best quality available." Once again, he tried to fix things with material things. It was what he was best at, the only way he knew how. "What I have is fine," I said non-committally. He fell silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Clara. You can call me by my first name from now on." He'd said that before. "And those designer bags, they're just things. You don't have to make such a big deal out of them." He spoke to me in that patient, instructive tone, like a generous teacher correcting a slow student. I almost laughed out loud. So in his mind, I was still that shallow woman who held grudges over a handbag or a spot in the study. I bit back the laugh and nodded obediently. I know. I was used to it. For years of marriage had taught me to live with this lopsided dynamic. His gaze fell back to the comic draft on my desk. The page from Snowy Night. "It's very good." He praised me sincerely, then added in that same matter-of-fact tone, "When it's finished, I'd like to keep the original for my collection." I said nothing. He didn't press the matter. He just glanced at his watch. "It's late. Let's get some sleep." He turned first and walked toward the bed. The main overhead light had been turned off at some point, leaving only one dim bedside lamp. The air smelled of his favorite cedar candle, warm and suffocating all at once. Ethan's presence washed over me, cold cedar scent and the burning heat of his palm. My body went taut as a bowstring. His lips brushed mine, soft. But I felt no warmth. My mind drifted away, back to our wedding night 4 years ago. A strange room, a strange man. No kisses, no tenderness, only tearing pain and one cold, sharp command. "Be still." Afterward, he'd gone straight to the bathroom, leaving me alone on that huge bed like a fish gasping for air on shore. Curled up in silence. Now his touch was gentler, even clumsy, almost tentative, but to me, it made no difference. A dull knife swapped for a slightly sharper one still cuts just as deep. In the haze, I heard him speak against my ear. "Clara, it's time we had a child." Not a question, a statement. I stared up at the dim shadows on the ceiling and said nothing, including tonight. 4 years. 3 times. So that was why he'd been acting strange all evening. I woke at 6 a.m. sharp, my internal clock as reliable as ever. I opened my eyes. The sky was just starting to lighten. Ethan was still asleep beside me. One heavy arm was draped across my waist, like an unbreakable chain. I shifted slightly. A familiar ache settled in my muscles. But that sharp, piercing pain I'd carried for 4 years was gone. I froze for a second, stunned. Even my body had learned to go numb. I held my breath and carefully lifted his arm off me, inch by inch, then slipped silently out of bed. My legs gave out the second my feet hit the floor. I gripped the bed frame to steady myself, then walked to the closet. When I came out dressed, Maeve was already waiting by the door. When she saw me, a flash of pity crossed her face. She lowered her voice. "Mrs. Hale, you're up early. Breakfast is ready." I nodded and walked straight to Victoria Hale's rooms. It was the rule. Every day, I had to go over the menu and schedule with her first. Victoria was tending to her expensive orchids on the balcony. She didn't turn around when she heard me. "Have you drafted the guest list for the spring charity gala? Hurry up with it. Don't make a mess of things like you did the first year, making a fool of us all." Her tone was even, but every word stung. I kept my eyes down and answered, "Yes, Mother." Victoria finally turned around. She glanced me up and down, then looked back at her flowers, as if talking to herself. "For years already, how time flies." My heart gave a sharp squeeze. I looked up at her. There was only a faint, distant look of nostalgia on her face. Then she frowned. "Oh, and that tea with Mrs. Wallace." She'd forgotten. She'd completely forgotten the promise she'd made me 4 years ago. The promise I'd spent 4 years of my youth and all my dignity keeping. A cold chill ran from the soles of my feet straight up to my skull. Just as well, after leaving Victoria's room, that cold chill stayed with me all day. It wasn't until 8 o'clock that evening that Ethan came out of the study. I'd just finished tidying the living room and was about to head back to our room. He called my name, already standing by the balcony. "Come here a minute." I walked over and saw he was holding my sketchbook, flipping slowly through the pages. It was the only place I'd been able to breathe for 4 years. Flowers on the balcony, the changing seasons outside the window, Maeve dozing in the kitchen. My whole world had been that small. "You've worked hard." He closed the book and handed it back, his voice unusually gentle. I took it. My fingers brushed his cool skin, and I flinched back instinctively. He didn't seem to notice. He gazed out at the city lights and went on. "These are good, but they feel a little limited. Clara, you should try drawing bigger things. The city, people, life." My heart sank. Bigger things. I looked down at the small, quiet world in my sketchbook. Wasn't my city, my life, all right here in this house? I didn't answer. I couldn't. He didn't seem to expect one anyway. He changed the subject. "James Wallace is coming over in a minute. Make some coffee." James Wallace, his closest college roommate, and the man who'd always looked down on me the most. I nodded and turned toward the kitchen. The rich aroma of coffee filled the small space, but I felt like I couldn't breathe. I carried the tray to the study door. It was slightly ajar, and James's loud, complaining voice carried clearly through the gap. "Dude. Honestly. I heard Scarlett got divorced a while back. Rough time of it. You know, if you'd just..." My feet froze to the floor. The edge of the tray bit into my palm. There was a few seconds silence inside. Then Ethan's calm, steady voice answered. "Marriage is a responsibility. Responsibility, not love, not affection, just 2 cold, hard words." James scoffed, his contempt plain as day. "Responsibility. What does she give you? Some random art major? Does she help your career even a little? Look at Scarlett's father." My breath caught. I almost couldn't stand. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt like they were made of lead. I had to know, what did I really mean to Ethan Hale? Then I heard his voice, clear and calm, like a judge reading a verdict that had nothing to do with him. "She comes from a plain background, but she does have real talent for art." My heart gave a sudden, sharp jolt at that unexpected praise. "Maybe." But his next words smashed that tiny, fragile spark of hope to pieces, like a hammer to glass. "It's her character that's flawed. I suppose. Women, after all, they tend to be a little vain. Women, after all, they tend to be a little vain." Ethan's voice was cold and detached. I stood there holding the tray, and that cup of coffee I'd made so carefully suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My knuckles went white from how hard I was gripping it. I didn't burst in and confront him. I didn't drop the tray in a fit of tears. I just turned, slowly, and walked away. Back in the master bedroom, I shut the door and set the tray down on the dresser. Steam curled up from the coffee, blurring my reflection in the mirror. I stared at that pale, lifeless face. It looked like a stranger. Something was stuck in my chest, tight and heavy, making it hard to breathe. I clutched my chest and gasped for air, but all I pulled into my lungs was cold air. For years of my youth, and all I'd gotten was flawed character, vain and materialistic. Tears finally spilled over, hot and fast, hitting the back of my hand. My whole life, the pride I'd clung to so carefully, the dignity I'd guarded so close, all of it was a joke. Mrs. Hale, are you all right? Maeve pushed the door open. When she saw me, she dropped the towel in her hand in shock. She hurried over and touched my cheek gently. Goodness, you're ice cold. I grabbed her hand, my whole body shaking so hard I could barely stand. And in that moment, everything went clear. I couldn't keep living like this. If I stayed here any longer, it would kill me. The tears stopped as suddenly as they'd started. I lifted my head and looked at her, my voice hoarse but perfectly calm. Maeve, get that envelope from the bottom drawer of the nightstand for me. She hesitated, but did as I asked. It was a brown manila envelope, a little worn at the edges. I set it on the vanity and smoothed out the creases, slowly, carefully. I'd prepared it a year ago. I'd once foolishly thought I'd never have to use it. I don't know how much time passed. The doorknob turned, and Ethan walked in. He took off his suit jacket and frowned when he saw me still sitting there. Why aren't you in bed? His tone was the same as always, distant, detached. I didn't answer. I just stood up and pushed the envelope across the table toward him. Ethan's eyes flicked from the envelope to my face. Curious, he opened it and pulled out the papers inside. When he saw the words divorce agreement at the top, that unshakable composure of his finally cracked. He looked up at me sharply, his gaze like a blade. Clara, what is this? What are you playing at? I met his eyes, those deep, dark eyes I'd once been so captivated by. Now there was nothing left in them but cold. I smiled, faint and soft. Then I said it, slow and clear. I want a divorce. My voice was quiet, but it hit him like a stone dropped into a still lake, sending waves of fury crashing through his eyes. Playing at. Ethan's voice was ice cold. Years of authority rolled off him in waves, filling the whole room. Once, that presence would have crushed me, but now I just reached over and pulled the agreement back from him, flipping to the last page and pointing to my signature at the bottom. Neat. Precise. The same copperplate calligraphy I'd practiced for 20 years. Clara Bennett. See, I already signed it. I even smiled a little at him. Just now, Ethan's eyes burned into that signature, like he could burn a hole straight through the paper. He lifted his head, and there was a storm in his dark eyes I couldn't read. Shock, rage, something else. When did you have this drawn up? His voice was low, every word forced out through clenched teeth. I met his gaze steadily. A year ago. His pupils flared. The air in the room felt thick enough to cut. I looked down, my voice completely even. 4 years ago, when my father was in the hospital and Leo had his accident, I had nowhere else to turn. I came to you. I know I stepped between you and Scarlett, that you never got to be with her because of me. I know you've resented it all this time. This agreement, it's the closure you deserve. I'd thought saying all that would make him see I was being reasonable, that I was doing this for him, but Ethan laughed, like he'd just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. Closure. He took a step closer, his tall shadow swallowing me whole. Did you forget? I said yes to this marriage. I don't walk away from the choices I make. Clara, what makes you think I need you to give me closure? He didn't understand. He would never understand. For 4 years, I'd lived like a prisoner carrying a sentence I'd given myself, trying to pay back this debt with obedience and care. Every late night he came home, every time he dismissed my art, every time he laughed with his friends and left me standing alone in the corner. All those tiny, endless little hurts had pierced my heart 1,000 times over. I'd thought if I just tried harder, it would be enough. But today, I finally understood. It wasn't me who wasn't good enough. It was that I'd never belonged there at all. My chest burned, hot and raw. For years of pent-up grief broke through every wall I'd built. Tears spilled down my face without warning. blurring my vision. Ethan. I said his full name out loud for the first time, my voice shaking. I'm so tired. So tired. Ethan clearly hadn't expected me to break down like this. He reached out a hand, like he wanted to touch me. Then froze mid-motion. The anger and sharpness faded from his face, replaced by a rare, awkward sort of helplessness. Tired of what? He frowned, like he'd finally found the problem. Is there too much work around the house? I'll have Arthur hire more staff tomorrow. My heart sank. I looked at him, hopeless, and slowly shook my head. The frustration on his face deepened, like he'd completely run out of patience. Then what is it? This is still about the gift I didn't bring you, isn't it? He pulled his wallet out of his pocket, slid out a black card, and held it out to me. Take this. No limit. Buy whatever you want. Consider it my apology. Compensation. So that was what he thought. All my grief, my exhaustion, my despair, all of it could be fixed with a gift. Or a bank card. The tears stopped instantly. When your heart dies, it stops hurting. I looked at him, my eyes as calm as still water. Ethan, this isn't something money can fix. If you're worried about your career, I can wait. We can keep it quiet until you're ready to go public. And if you still won't agree. I took a deep breath and said the words I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head. I'll walk away with nothing. No alimony. No property. Clean break. Ethan's hand holding the card froze in midair. He stared at me, long and hard, like he was trying to see straight through my skin into my soul. In the end, he said nothing. He just slammed the card down on the floor, turned, and wrenched the door open so hard it shook. Bang! The sound of the door slamming echoed through the whole house. The huge stone that had sat on my chest for 4 years shattered in that instant. I let out a long, silent breath, lighter than I'd felt in years. The front door hadn't quite clicked shut when Victoria Hale appeared, drawn by the noise. She stood there in an elegant silk robe, her face set in that familiar, critical expression. Her eyes flicked from me to the black card on the floor at my feet, and her brows drew together sharply. What on earth is all this racket? What did you do to upset him this time? I bent down, picked up the signed agreement, and held it out to her calmly. Mother, we're getting a divorce. Victoria stared for half a second, then let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Divorce? Clara, have you lost your mind? What would you even do without the Hale family to support you? I looked at her, completely unshaken. Mother, I'm doing this for Ethan's sake. He has a promising career ahead of him. He deserves a wife with a better education, a better family name, someone who can help him advance. A wife like me will only hold him back and make you look bad in front of your friends. Me leaving is better for everyone. Victoria was struck speechless. She cared more about status and appearances than anything. Every word I'd said hit exactly where it hurt. She couldn't argue with a single point. A cold, sharp figure appeared in the front doorway, having turned back without a sound. Ethan's face was darker than before, his gaze like a blade of ice pointed straight at me. Mother, go back to your room. His voice brooked no argument. Victoria opened her mouth, but thought better of it and turned to leave, clearly put out. The huge living room was just the two of us now. Ethan walked slowly over and sat down on the sofa across from me, his presence heavy and oppressive. He stared at me like he was interrogating a suspect. What would you do if you left me? He still had that same arrogant certainty that I couldn't survive without him. I smiled. Ethan, I don't want any of your money. I have my own comic studio. I've been running it for a year now. It makes a steady income. I watched his face go completely rigid and went on. I signed a deal with a well-known editor in the industry. The royalties are more than enough to live on. The silence was deafening. I could see his hand on his knee tightening, finger by finger, until it was a fist. The veins standing out on the back of his hand. All that control he was so proud of crumbled right in front of me. I looked away, my voice softening a little. Besides, Grandma's getting older. I want to go back home and be with her. At the mention of her family, Ethan's tight jaw seemed to loosen a fraction. A flicker of guilt crossed his eyes. Grandma's health. I should have brought her here sooner. His voice was rough, thick with late remorse. I shook my head. It's fine. She's used to small-town life. The city's too loud for her. I sat there quietly after I'd said my piece, watching the shock and confusion and disbelief cross his face. After a long time, he found his voice again, every word scraping raw from his throat. You planned this all along, didn't you? Faced with that cold, sharp tone, I didn't even look up. Yes, one single word, light as air. But it hit him like a hammer to the chest. I saw his pupils shrink to pinpoints. I didn't feel like dragging this out. I walked straight over to the coffee table. Wrapping things up won't take long. I spread out several folders one by one, my voice steady and even. These are all the appliance warranties and manuals for the house, sorted by brand and purchase date. These are the contact numbers and schedules for the gardener, the pool service, and the family doctor. These are the dry cleaner cards for all your suits, and the prepaid cards for the restaurants you frequent. Everything was organized, clear as day. For years, and I hadn't just been some caged bird wasting away in a studio. Ethan stared at all those papers, his Adam's apple bobbing once. He spoke roughly. You've worked hard all these years, 4 years too late, and I didn't need to hear it anymore. I ignored him and pulled out 3 account ledgers from my bag. Now let's go over the finances. First book, daily household expenses. Second, utilities, maintenance, gifts and social events. Third, your personal spending. Every entry is documented with receipts. Arthur the butler stared, wide-eyed, and couldn't help murmuring in awe, Mrs. Hale, this is incredible. I flipped to a certain page, and my finger paused. It was from our first year of marriage. I'd been scammed out of a huge sum of money by a luxury goods reseller. Ethan had just looked at me coldly back then and said, you can't even handle something this simple. Is your brain just for decoration? After that day, I'd thrown myself into learning everything about finance and budgeting, reading every book I could get my hands on. I pushed the ledgers across the table to him. 4 years. Total income $1,327,000. Total expenses $1,108,000. Balance $219,000. It's all on this card. You can have an accountant go over it if there's so much as a penny out of place. Enough. Ethan slammed a hand down, cutting me off. The veins on his hand were bulging. His hand was shaking. I looked up, meeting his angry, burning eyes straight on. What is it, District Attorney Hale? Afraid I embezzled from the family fortune? Or have you always thought I was just some gold-digging woman who'd sell anything for money? I stood up and didn't look at him again. I walked over to Arthur and the other staff, who were all standing to the side with red-rimmed eyes. Arthur, thank you for everything, all these years. Take care of yourselves from now on. They all spoke up at once, begging me to stay, their voices thick with real affection. I smiled and shook my head, then went back to the coffee table and poured myself a glass of water. I lifted it toward Ethan, pale and rigid across from me. This is in place of a toast. Thank you for arranging Leo's job transfer. I won't forget that kindness. I drank it down in one go and set the glass down softly. It made a clear, sharp sound. That sound was the final note. You already signed the divorce papers. I'll have my lawyer file them with the court as soon as possible. I picked up my bag and didn't give him another chance to speak. I turned and didn't look back. Sunlight streamed through the huge floor ceiling windows, cut into bright stripes by the blinds, laying a golden path at my feet. I walked toward it, light and sure. My hand was just about to close around the doorknob when there was a heavy thud behind me, the sound of knees hitting cold marble. I turned, stunned. A young housekeeper, the girl named Lila Brooks, was kneeling right there on the floor. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, full of gratitude and grief. Mrs. Hale. Her voice cracked as it echoed through the empty living room. Thank you. Thank you for lending me the money for my mom's surgery 2 years ago. Without you, she would have died. We all know how good you are. Please don't leave. She bowed her head and pressed her forehead to the floor in a deep, reverent kneel. Arthur and the other staff gathered around, all with wet eyes, like they had so much they wanted to say. So the small kindnesses I'd thought no one remembered had been kept close all this time. Some hard, frozen place in my chest softened, warm and aching, and my eyes stung. I hurried over and helped Lila to her feet. Stand up. It's all in the past. My voice was a little rough, but softer than it had been in years. I wiped the tears from her face and looked around at all the people I'd lived with day in and day out. Take care of yourselves. And look after Sunny for me. She's picky. Only eats the imported cat food. Sunny was the stray cat I'd rescued 3 years ago. The only warm thing in that cold house. My gaze drifted past the crowd and landed on Maeve, hiding in the shadow of the doorway. Her shoulders shook, and she bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out loud. I gave her a helpless little smile. I couldn't take her with me. I couldn't take Sunny either. None of this had ever really been mine. At last, my eyes settled on the man standing there. Ethan hadn't moved. He looked like a statue with its soul torn out, his face full of a strange, lost bewilderment. He looked at me, at all the staff crying for me, and all the storm in his eyes seemed to shatter all at once. All that was left was confusion he couldn't make sense of. For years, it was the first time I'd ever really seen him. Not the brilliant district attorney, not the heir to the Hale family, just a sad, proud man blinded by his own privilege and prejudice. I looked away, no regrets left, pulled the door open, and walked out without looking back. The taxi sped down the highway. Skyscrapers gave way to rolling green hills outside the window. The noise of the city fell away behind me. The air smelled of dirt and growing things. I rolled down the window and let the damp wind blow across my face, drying the last of my tears. A 4-year nightmare was finally over. The car stopped in front of a small cottage with a yard, way out in the suburbs. From far away, I could see a small, thin figure leaning against the gate, craning her neck to watch for me. Grandma Eleanor. I threw the car door open and ran to her, almost tripping in my haste. Grandma. That one word held every bit of grief and restraint from 4 years. Grandma opened her arms and pulled me tight into her thin, warm embrace. Her old hand stroked my hair over and over. You're home. You're home at last. Clara, baby, you're home. I buried my face in her sun-warmed sweater, breathing in the scent of gardenias from the yard and the distant bark of a dog. My heart finally settled. The bird had come back to its nest. Life in the little cottage felt like stepping out of a hospital room and into the sunshine. The yard wasn't big, but Grandma had filled it with growing things. An old storage shed in the corner, covered in ivy, I'd turned into my studio. Sunlight poured through the big lattice windows onto the easel, and the air smelled of grass and damp earth. I didn't have to huddle in that tiny closet of a room at Hale Manor anymore, chasing light through one tiny window. One afternoon, Grandma and I were out in the yard tending the flowers. She stopped by the pear tree in the middle of the yard and rested her wrinkled hand on the rough bark. Clara, I planted this tree the year you married into the Hale family. I froze. Grandma's gaze was distant, like she was looking through the tree at that thin, determined girl who'd left 4 years ago. Back home, we always said the pear tree has a guardian spirit watching over it. I made her a promise. She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling like dried orange peel. I told her I'd give up my own good sleep if it meant my Clara would be safe and free for the rest of her days. My nose stung, and tears spilled down my face before I could stop them. All this time, in ways I'd never seen, Grandma had been praying for me. In her own quiet way, I threw myself into her arms like a lost child finally finding her way home. Grandma, I'm so sorry. She just patted my back, over and over. Silly girl, home is home. There's nothing to be sorry for. Dinner was simple but warm. A baked cod fillet, a plate of bright sautéed spinach, and mashed potatoes made with fresh butter. The whole house smelling like fresh bread. Grandma and I sat under the warm yellow light. She piled food onto my plate and chattered about her plans for the empty spots in the yard, about planting roses and climbing vines. I looked at her, and that rough, worn place in my heart slowly filled up with soft, warm things. Here, I wasn't Mrs. Hale. I wasn't some perfect ornament that had to be polished every day. I was just Clara Bennett. All the inspiration I'd locked away for 4 years burst free, wild and unbound, flowing across the paper. There were no more limits on what I could draw. In the evenings, I liked to walk in the little park nearby. The sunset gilded the country lanes in soft gold. The air smelled of birds heading home to roost and wildflowers. I felt loose, light, happy all the way down to my bones. But when I walked back to the cottage that night, I stopped short. Parked right by the gate was a sleek black luxury car. Completely out of place. Those smooth lines and that expensive badge looked like a metal beast curled up in the countryside, wrong and sharp against everything around it. It was Ethan's car. My stomach dropped. Before I could react, the cottage door opened. A familiar figure came running out, bright and happy. Maeve Sullivan. Clara, you're back. Her face lit up with unguarded joy. Like a puppy seeing its owner. Seeing her loosened the tight knot in my chest a little, and I found myself smiling back. But the next second, the driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped out. Ethan. He was wearing a well-tailored dark gray casual suit, less sharp than usual, softer around the edges. He looked at me, and there was none of that cold judgment in his eyes. There was something almost hopeful, something I couldn't name. My smile faded instantly. I stood up straight, tucking all my feelings away, and gave him a small, polite nod. Mr. Hale. My voice was calm, distant, polite as a stranger's. The light in Ethan's eyes dimmed. Right before my eyes, Maeve looked from me to him, awkwardly rubbing her hands together. Clara, Grandma said to help with the water, so I'll go inside now. She bolted for the house like a startled rabbit. It was just the two of us by the gate. The evening wind carried the scent of grass from the fields, blowing the stray hairs off my forehead. I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. My voice even. Come in, sit for a while. He followed me silently, his steps hesitant, like he was taking in this little country yard that was so far removed from his world. Inside, Grandma was sitting in a wicker chair sorting vegetables. When she saw Ethan, she just lifted her eyelids slightly and kept right on working. Ethan stood in front of her and bowed slightly, his voice tight with a nervousness I'd never heard from him. Grandma, I'm sorry, for all these years. I should have brought you to live with us. It was my fault. Grandma dropped a cleaned green bean into the basket, not looking up. You're too kind, Mr. Hale. These old bones of mine don't take well to tall buildings and city life. Mr. Hale. The words drew a clear, sharp line between them. Ethan's face went a shade paler. I said nothing. I turned and went to the kitchen, bringing out 2 cups of freshly brewed tea. It was wild-foraged herbal tea from the hills. When you poured hot water over it, it released a rough, bright fragrance that filled the room. I pushed 1 cup toward him. Try it. Country things. Nothing fancy. He picked up the cup and took a small sip. His brows relaxed a little. It's very good. Has a character all its own. He set the cup down and his eyes came back to me, studying me closely. You look better than you did at the house. Healthier. As soon as the words left his mouth, I burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. The laugh rang loud in the quiet room, sharp and unexpected. Ethan just stared, completely thrown. I finally stopped laughing and wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes, looking right at him. Mr. Hale, you probably don't know this, but in 4 years at your house, I never once laughed like that. His Adam's apple bobbed hard. He pulled a fancy gift box out of the paper bag he'd brought and pushed it across the table to me. I got this for you. The weather's turning cool. I didn't open it. I just glanced at the gold-embossed logo on the box. A silk scarf. More of the same. I pushed the box back. My voice was cold. That's not necessary, Mr. Hale. I never cared about things like that. Back at Hale Manor, I always wore those same old clothes. Not because I couldn't afford new ones. It's because... I paused, meeting his confused eyes directly. I didn't like that putting them on meant I had to be Mrs. Hale. Ethan's face went completely still. He looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end all he managed was... The house. It's a mess without you. Arthur's getting on in years. The new housekeepers don't know how anything works. My mother. She misses you. He was trying to paint a picture of a household falling apart. Only I could fix it. Everyone says the place doesn't run right without you. I listened quietly. Is that so? I asked softly, lifting my cup and blowing on the floating leaves. But I remember it wasn't that way when I first moved in. The first time I tried to host a tea, I broke your mother's favorite Limoges porcelain tea set. All the guests were whispering. She looked like she could have killed me. Where were you then? My voice was quiet. but every word drove into him like a nail. I was alone in the kitchen, staring at all the broken pieces. Not knowing what to do, Arthur snuck in to help me clean up and talk me through it. Where were you then? After that day, I read every book I could find on tea etiquette, flower arranging, household management, even fine china appraisal. I wasn't born knowing how to handle all those society wives. I wasn't born knowing how to run a house with a dozen staff. I lifted my eyes, my gaze sharp as ice, straight into his. I wasn't born good at any of it. Ethan, I learned. I ate 100 quiet humiliations, swallowed every bitter thing alone in the middle of the night, until I got it right. He looked away sharply, his jaw set so tight it looked painful. The room went dead silent. I stood up slowly and walked to the door, pulling it open. Outside, the pear tree rustled in the evening wind. You've finished your tea. The divorce papers are clear. We're even now. Goodbye, Mr. Hale. I'd thought that final, sharp refusal would be enough to make him stay away. But Ethan didn't give up. After that, every weekend afternoon, he'd show up at the cottage gate right on time. He never knocked. He never said much. He'd just leave a few things quietly on the stone step by the door, then turn and leave. Sometimes it was imported low-sugar pastries for Grandma. Sometimes it was the latest law journals, with little pencil notes in the margins marking the cases he thought I'd find interesting. I looked at all those things and felt nothing, just a faint, bitter irony. So he did know how to be thoughtful. He'd just never bothered with me, for 4 whole years. Then one day, he didn't bring snacks or journals. He brought a huge, leather-bound art book, Dutch Golden Age still life painting, original hardcover edition. I was sitting in the yard sketching the newly bloomed hollyhocks. He stood on the other side of the fence, watching quietly for a long time. What do you think of the goldfinch? He asked suddenly, his voice warm, like an old friend talking about art. My pen stilled. I was surprised. Rich, vivid color work, very elegant. But the technique is too precise. Not enough heart. So you prefer Winslow Homer's wilder, looser style? I looked up and met his eyes. In the sunlight, the hard edge of the district attorney was gone. There was something almost genuine, curious in his eyes. I found myself talking to him longer than I'd intended. We talked about copperplate calligraphy, about the Spencerian script masterwork. I had to admit, setting aside everything between us, he was excellent company, brilliant, sharp, interesting. For a little while, I felt that old, familiar thrill of talking to someone who actually got it. Maybe that brief moment of peace gave him the wrong idea. He was quiet for a moment, then finally spoke, his voice tight with suppressed pleading. Clara, give me another chance. Come home, please. The word home coming from his mouth stung. I set down my brush. All that faint warmth and appreciation vanished like smoke. I didn't get angry. I just looked at him calmly. Come with me. I turned and pushed open the door to the old storage shed at the back of the yard. The sharp, familiar scent of turpentine and ink hit us both. Inside, it wasn't a jumble of old tools anymore. Sunlight poured through the skylight, illuminating row after row of easels and finished paintings. On the walls, on the floor, stacked everywhere, me work, stormy seas, old country roads, a city lit up with 10,000 lights at night. Ethan froze in the doorway, stunned. Ethan, I turned to him, my voice clear and steady. This is why I won't go back to that home. Hale Manor is huge, but there wasn't a single room in it where I could set up an easel. You could give me a card to buy any jewelry, any dress I wanted, but you couldn't buy me one quiet afternoon to paint. His mouth moved, like he wanted to argue. I didn't let him. Do you remember our wedding night? His whole body went rigid. All the color drained from his face. I was scared, I said, flat, like I was telling someone else's story. I was so scared I was shaking all over. And you just looked at me coldly, then went to the study and shut the door. Later, when you were out of town working on a case for 3 months, I asked if I could come with you. I wanted a change of scenery. You said, what would you even do there? Pour me tea. All those moments that had once broken my heart didn't hurt anymore. When I said them out loud, just numb. All that's in the past. I don't blame you anymore. I don't hate you either. I walked over to the window and looked out at all the paintings filling the room. I just finally realized I'm not made for that life. All that wealth. All those rules. I can't breathe in it. I gestured casually at a newly finished painting of a rainbow breaking through a storm. See, my work isn't just pear trees and cottage gardens anymore. My world was so much bigger now. How could I ever go back to that tiny, cramped cage where I had to watch every breath I took? Ethan stood in the middle of the studio, surrounded by my work and my words. Like a lost child, all the color was gone from his face. For the first time, that calm, in-control look was gone from his eyes. All that was left was raw, messy helplessness. That showdown in the studio seemed to finally break him. For a whole month after that, Ethan didn't show up again. Moss started growing back on the stone step by the gate. My life settled into a peace deeper than any I'd ever known. Early summer rain fell soft and steady all day long, washing the flowers in the yard bright and green. I didn't paint stormy seascapes anymore. I painted rain on banana leaves, and sparrows sheltering under the eaves. When your heart is quiet, the world you draw is gentle too. Maeve came in from outside, closing her umbrella, and mentioned it offhand. Clara, I heard from the driver that things are pretty chaotic at the Hale place. Mrs. Hale fired the cook. Mabel, I was mixing paint pigment. I just made a soft, non-committal sound. All those people, all that drama, they were a million miles away from me now. They couldn't stir so much as a ripple. But that peace didn't last. Through the rain, a familiar black car pulled up at the gate, completely out of nowhere. The door opened. Ethan got out, holding a black umbrella. My stomach sank. I was about to turn and go back inside when I saw him circle around to the back door and pull it open. A figure stumbled out, thin, swallowed up by an oversized coat. Frail and unsteady, Ethan helped him walk slowly toward the gate. My heart started hammering for no reason I could name. Through the rain, I couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something painfully familiar about his shape. Then they came closer, and the man lifted his head. Everything went white and silent in my head. Time stopped. All I could see was that pale, gaunt face, so thin it was almost unrecognizable. It was my brother, Leo. Leo. My lips trembled. I could barely get the word out. Tears burst from my eyes. I ran out into the rain like a woman possessed, not caring about the mud under my feet, and threw my arms around him. He was so thin. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, I could almost feel every rib. Clara. Leo's voice was rough, like sandpaper. He wrapped his arms around me, his whole body shaking hard. I could feel warm tears dropping onto my neck. One by one, I pulled him away from Ethan and led him inside. Grandma was sitting in the living room reading the paper. She looked up when she heard us, and the smile on her face froze the second she saw Leo. Leo. My sweet boy. Leo looked at her, his eyes flooding red. His legs gave out and he dropped to his knees, bowing his head to the floor in one deep, heavy kneel. Grandma, I'm so sorry. The newspaper slipped out of Grandma's hands. She tried to stand, but swayed and fell backward into her chair. Grandma. Leo and I screamed her name at the same time. The whole afternoon was chaos and grief. After the doctor left, after Grandma and Leo were both settled, exhausted and asleep, I finally had a minute to breathe. I walked out into the hall. Ethan was still there. He hadn't come inside. He was standing under the eaves of the studio, looking quietly at all the paintings. The rain dripped steadily, making everything feel quiet and still. I walked over to him, gathered myself, and bowed deeply. Solemnly. Thank you. That bow was for my brother, for our whole broken family. He stepped aside like he couldn't bear to take it. There was anger in his voice, held tight. Clara, we don't have to do this. I stood up straight and looked at him calmly. Mr. Hale, we're divorced now. I owe you thanks, and I mean it. You've earned it. I didn't help you so you could keep score. He finally snapped, taking a step toward me. There was a storm in his eyes I couldn't read. I stepped back automatically, putting distance between us. That small movement seemed to cut him deeper than anything. He laughed, bitter and tired. You think I'm just trying to make up for how I treated you? He paused, gazing out through the rain at nothing in particular. All those years ago, when my father was in that car crash, your father risked his own life to pull him out. The Hale family owes your family more than I can ever repay. I turned and went into the studio. Took a bank card out of the drawer. It had all the money from the first painting I'd ever sold. I held that thin plastic card between my fingers and walked back out to him. Here, take this. I held it out. I know it's not nearly enough. Not enough to pay you back for getting Leo trans. Farade. Not enough for everything. These 4 years. But it's a start. I'll keep painting. Keep working. I'll pay every last bit of it back. One way or another. My voice was calm. Like I was stating the simplest fact in the world. Ethan stared at that card like it was some kind of poison. He didn't take it. The air went thick and dangerous. Even the rain seemed to fall quieter. Suddenly he laughed. A cold, hollow sound. Pay it back. He lifted his head sharply. His eyes were bloodshot. All that suppressed feeling burst out like a volcano. Clara, is that what we are to you? A list of debts you can add up and pay off with money? His voice was raw. I didn't help you so you could balance the books. I was an idiot. I was blind. I had a pearl in the palm of my hand and I treated it like a worthless rock. He stepped forward and closed his fingers around my wrist. Hot and tight. The bank cards slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the wet stone step. I love you. 3 words. Heavy and desperate. Like he'd bet everything on them. My heart gave a violent, painful lurch. His eyes burned into mine. Like he could set me on fire. Clara. Let's start over. Please. His voice softened, almost begging. We'll move out of the manor, get a new house with a yard, build you a glass studio facing south. So you can paint all day, every day, until the sun goes down. If you want to travel and paint, I'll go with you. You want to see the northern lights? We'll go to Norway. You want to paint the desert? We'll go to the Sahara. We can try for a baby again. The future he painted was like a bright, beautiful oil painting. Every detail hit exactly the softest, most tender place in my heart. It was a dream so warm it almost didn't feel real. My heart raced. Wild and out of control. For a second, I almost said yes. Then my gaze drifted past his shoulder, to the half-finished painting in the studio. A bird, breaking free from tangling vines, flying out into a wide, endless sky. That image hit me like a bucket of ice water. All that softness, all that weakness, cooled and settled. I gently pulled my wrist free. Ethan, I said, meeting his hopeful eyes. What you're describing sounds beautiful. It really does. But status comes with responsibility. Being Mrs. Hale. It's a chain around my neck. It's too heavy. My voice was clear and sure. I'm selfish. I guess. I don't want to learn flower arranging to impress people anymore. I don't want to wear uncomfortable heels for parties. I don't want to spend every minute of every day managing a house and keeping up with everyone's expectations. I want to be free, like a bird. His face paled. Slowly, word by word, the light in his eyes dimmed. Inch by inch, I looked at him and said the final answer, slow and clear. The answer is no. Time stood still. The last spark in his eyes went out completely. He slowly let go of my hand. His shoulders slumped. Like a tree with all its life cut out of it. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at me, long and deep, then turned and walked back out into the rain. That tall, proud back looked smaller, lonelier than I'd ever seen it. The black car pulled away silently and vanished around the bend in the lane. I stood there, looking down at the rain-soaked bank card at my feet. After that rainy day, Ethan never came back. A month later, the last autumn rain fell. And Grandma took to her bed. She was peaceful about it. I was peaceful about it. We both knew she'd been holding on, waiting for Leo and me to be all right. Now that we were, she could let go. Ethan did come, though. He didn't bring up us or the past. He just brought one of the most respected naturopathic physicians in New York. After the examination, the doctor told me gently that Grandma had, at most, 2 months left. I thanked him quietly and saw them to the door. After that, Ethan came every day. He brought all kinds of warming herbs and tonics. A quiet shadow at the edge of things. He sat on the porch, never coming inside to disturb her, just stepping in silently when I needed an extra hand. I told him not to bother, but he just shook his head and kept coming. After a while, I stopped trying to send him away. In November, the last autumn rain tapped against the window panes. Grandma, who'd been sleeping for days, woke up that afternoon, she was strangely alert. Almost bright. She even sat up by herself and put on her cardigan. There was a clear, steady light in her cloudy old eyes. "Ethan, come here, child." Her voice was soft, but clear as a bell. Ethan hurried inside and sat down on the low stool by the bed. Leaning in close, "Grandma." His voice was rough. Grandma's thin, wrinkled hand rested lightly on the back of his, patting it gently. "Good boy, you've been so kind, all these days. I know you're a good boy." Her gaze drifted past him to me, full of love and regret. "If it hadn't been for this old body giving out on me, I never would have let my Clara give up her art, her future, just to buy me a few more years." Every word was like a dull knife, cutting slow and deep into Ethan. His tall frame hunched over, lower and lower. His head dropped. His shoulders started shaking, uncontrollable. "Ethan." Grandma's eyes came back to his, gentle and knowing, like she could see straight through everything. "I know all about what happened between you two. You were never meant to be. That weight in her heart won't go away. That guilt in yours won't be paid back. It's like tangled thread. You can't untie it. Pull too hard, and it just breaks. Let her go, and let yourself go, too." Her voice was soft as the rain outside, gentle, but cold and final, washing away every last foolish hope. Ethan buried his face in his hands. I saw a single hot tear seep through his fingers and hit the old wooden floor, darkening the wood into a small, wet spot. Quiet, shaking sobs filled the small room. Grandma didn't look at him anymore. She turned her face to the window. Outside, all the leaves had fallen from the pear tree. Bare branches swayed in the wind and rain. "Such a shame," she breathed, very softly. "I won't be here to see it bloom next spring." Grandma's funeral was small and simple. Just a few close neighbors and friends. When it was all over, I packed the last of my suitcases. Leo carried them silently to the door. Before we left for the airport, I asked Ethan to meet me one last time at a cafe downtown. He was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window. He was wearing a dark blue suit, the first one I'd ever made for him. The only one. The fabric was sharp, the cut perfect, making his shoulders look broad and his legs long. But that bright, confident face was worn thin, exhausted past hiding. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. He picked up the coffee pot and poured me a cup, steam curling up between us. His hands moved like muscle memory, like we were still married. "Where are you going?" he asked first, his voice dry. "Portland," I said, meeting his eyes honestly. "My studio's moving there. Everything's set up." His knuckles whitened around the coffee pot. "A comic artist," he murmured, like he was laughing at himself. I was such an idiot. I thought it was just childish scribbles. I was so wrong. I picked up my coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into my palms, and looked at him calmly. "Ethan, it's all in the past now." His shoulders slumped. All the light went out of his eyes. I went on. "It was never about who was right or wrong. We just weren't right for each other. You wanted a wife who could run your whole house, who'd take care of everything so you never had to worry. And all I ever wanted was a paintbrush and a desk where I could draw in peace." He was quiet for a very long time, long enough for the coffee to go cold. A gilded cage is still a cage. You can't keep a bird that was born to fly. He lifted his head at last. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he was smiling, a faint, resigned sort of smile. He lifted his coffee cup toward me. "Clara, this is in place of a toast. I wish you blue skies and tailwinds everywhere you go." I lifted my cup too, and clinked it gently against his from across the table. "And I wish you everything you've ever wanted. A good life, all of it." I drank the last of my coffee, stood up, and grabbed my coat. Leo was already waiting by the door. I didn't look back. I walked out of the cafe. The cold early winter wind hit my face, sharp and clean, and I felt light, free. I looked up at the gray sky. A flock of migrating birds flew south in a perfect, steady line, unhurried, unstopping, sure of where they were going.